Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark (OMD) are an English electronic band formed in Wirral, Merseyside in 1978. The group consists of co-founders Andy McCluskey vocals, bass guitar, and Paul Humphreys keyboards, vocals, along with Martin Cooper various instruments and Stuart Kershaw drums. McCluskey has been the only constant member. Regarded as pioneers of electronic music, OMD combined an experimental, minimalist ethos with pop sensibilities, becoming central figures in the late 1970s/early 1980s emergence of synth-pop. McCluskey and Humphreys led precursor group The ID from 1977-1978 and re-recorded their track Electricity as OMD debut single in 1979. Weathering an uncool image and a degree of hostility from music critics, the band gained popularity throughout Europe with the 1980 anti-war song Enola Gay and achieved broader recognition via Architecture and Morality 1981 and its three hit singles. Although later reappraised, Dazzle Ships 1983 was seen as overly challenging and eroded European support. The group embraced a more radio-friendly sound on Junk Culture 1984. This change in direction led to greater success in the United States and yielded the 1986 hit, If You Leave. In 1989, creative differences saw Humphreys and other members form the spin-off band The Listening Pool, leaving McCluskey the only remaining member of OMD. The group returned with a new lineup and explored the dance-pop genre. Sugar Tax 1991 and its initial singles were hits in Europe. By the mid-1990s, however, electronic music had been supplanted by alternative rock, and both OMD and The Listening Pool disbanded in 1996. McCluskey later conceived pop girl group Atomic Kitten, for whom he served as a principal songwriter, while Humphreys formed the duo Uncool alongside propaganda vocalist Claudia Brucken. In 2006, the band reformed with Humphreys and McCluskey working on material closer in sound to their early output. The Punishment of Luxury 2017 was the group's seventh top 10 entry on the UK albums chart. They have also achieved 12 top 20 hits on the UK singles chart, as well as 3 top 20 hits on the US Billboard Hot 100. An influence on many later artists, OMD have sold over 40 million records worldwide. History: 1975–1979, Roots and Early Years. Founders Andy McCluskey and Paul Humphreys met at primary school in Meols in the early 1960s and in the mid-1970s as teenagers. They were involved in different local groups but shared a distaste for guitar-driven rock with a macho attitude popular among their friends at the time. By 1975, McCluskey had formed Equinox as bassist and vocalist, alongside schoolmate Malcolm Holmes on drums, while Humphreys was roadie. During that time, McCluskey and Humphreys discovered their electronic style, inspired by Kraftwerk. After Equinox, McCluskey joined Pegasus, and later, the short-lived Hitler's Underpants, alongside Humphreys. McCluskey would usually sing and play bass guitar, roadie and electronics enthusiast Humphreys, who shared McCluskey's love of electronic music, graduated to keyboards. In September 1977, McCluskey and Humphreys put together the seven-piece three singers, two guitarists, bassist, drummer, and keyboard player Wirral group The ID, whose lineup included drummer Malcolm Holmes and McCluskey's girlfriend Julia Neal on vocals. The group began to gig regularly in the Merseyside area, performing original material largely written by McCluskey and Humphreys. They had quite a following on the scene, and one of their tracks, Julia's Song, was included on a compilation record of local bands called Street to Street. Meanwhile, Humphreys and McCluskey collaborated on a side project called VCL Roman 11, whose name was adapted from a diagram on the back cover of Kraftwerk's Radioactivity album, reading VCL 11. This project allowed them to pursue their more obscure electronic experiments. In August 1978, the ID split due to musical differences. The same month, McCluskey joined Wirral electronic outfit Dalek I Love You as lead singer, but quit in September. Later that month, the name was gleaned from a list of song lyrics and ideas that were written on McCluskey's bedroom wall, and was chosen so they would not be mistaken for a punk band. Given that OMD intended to play only one gig, the duo considered their moniker to be inconsequential. McCluskey has since expressed regret over choosing such a very silly name. The contrasting personalities of Humphreys and McCluskey established the band's dynamic, with the former saying that two Pauls wouldn't get anything done and two Andys would kill each other. They have further described their creative roles as the surgeon Humphreys and the butcher McCluskey. As working-class youngsters, OMD had a limited budget, using second-hand junk shop instruments including a left-handed bass guitar which McCluskey would play upside down. The pair also created their own devices, with Humphreys making things out of his aunt's radios cannibalized for the circuit boards. Eventually, they acquired a basic Korg M-500 micro preset synthesizer, purchased via McCluskey's mother's mail-order catalog for £7.76 a week, paid over 36 weeks. OMD began to gig regularly as a duo, performing to backing tracks played from a teak 4-track tape recorder christened Winston after the anti-hero of George Orwell's novel 1984. Their debut performance was in October 1978 at Eric's Club in Liverpool. Finding themselves on the cusp of an electronic new wave in British pop music, they released a one-off single, Electricity, with independent label Factory Records. The track was supposed to be produced by the Factory Records producer Martin Hannett. However, the aside was the band's original demo produced by their friend. The single's sleeve was designed by Peter Saville, whose distinctive graphics contributed to OMD public image into the 1980s. The success of Electricity led to the band receiving a 7-album record deal with Dindisk, worth over £250,000. In 1979, they were asked to support Gary Numan on his first major British tour. Humphreys noted, "Numan gave us our first big break. He saw us opening for Joy Division, and he asked us to go on tour with him. We went from the small clubs to playing huge arenas. Gary was very good to us." Numan later supported OMD on a 1993 UK arena tour. 1980–1988, classic lineup up. Rather than hire studio time to record their eponymous debut album 1980, McCluskey and Humphreys used their advance payment from Dindisk to build their own Liverpool recording studio, the Gramophone Suite. They predicted that they would be dropped by the label due to disappointing sales, but would at least own a studio. The album showcased the band's live set at the time and included some guest drums from ID drummer Malcolm Holmes and saxophone from Wirral musician Martin Cooper. It had a raw, poppy, melodic synth-pop sound. Dindisk arranged for the song Messages to be re-recorded, produced by Gong bassist Mike Hallett, and released as a single. It gave the band their first hit. Dave Hughes, a founder member of Dalek I Love You who joined OMD in 1980, is featured in the Messages video. A tour followed. Winston, the tape recorder, was augmented with live drums from Malcolm Holmes, and Dave Hughes played synths. Hughes left OMD in late 1980. The second album, Organization, a reference to the band which preceded Kraftwerk, founded by Kraftwerk's original members Florian Schneider, Slevin, and Ralph Hutter, followed later that year, recorded as a three-piece with Humphreys, McCluskey, and Holmes. It was again produced by Hallett and had a moodier, dark feel, largely inspired by the passing of former Factory label mate and Joy Division singer Ian Curtis. The album included the anti-war hit single Enola Gay, named after the plane that dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The song was intended to be included on the debut album, but was left out at the final selection. The tour for this album had a four-piece band line-up, with saxophonist Martin Cooper, another Dalek I Love You alumnus, recruited for keyboard duties and enlisted as an official group member. The McCluskey/Humphreys/Cooper/Holmes unit came to be regarded as the band's classic lineup. In early 1981, readers of Record Mirror voted OMD the fourth best band and eighth best live act of 1980. NME and Sounds readers named the group the eighth and 10th best new act of the year, respectively. In Smash Hits, they were voted both the fifth best band of 1980 and the eighth hottest new act for 1981. Howlett then presided over the recording of a further hit single, Souvenir, co-written by Cooper and Humphreys. It ushered in a lush choral electronic sound. The song also became OMD's biggest UK hit to date. In November 1981, their most commercially successful album was released in the UK and Europe, Architecture and Morality. The group went into the studio with Richard Manwaring producing. Cooper then temporarily dropped out and was replaced by Mike Douglas, but this change was reversed by the time the album was released and a tour followed. The album's sound saw OMD original synth-pop sound augmented by the mellotron, an instrument previously associated with prog rock bands. They used it to add atmospheric swatches of string choir and other sounds to their palette. Two more hit singles, Joan of Arc and Maid of Orleans, which became the biggest-selling single of 1982 in Germany, were on the album. Joan of Arc and Maid of Orleans were originally both titled Joan of Arc. The name of the latter single was changed at the insistence of the publishers and to avoid confusion. It became Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans, and later simply Maid of Orleans. Readers of Smash Hits voted OMD the seventh best group of 1981, while Record Mirror readers named them the eighth best band as well as the 10th best new artist and the third best live act of the year. The group came close to splitting up in 1982, with McCluskey later saying, "We had never expected the success. We were exhausted." In 1983, the band lost commercial momentum somewhat with the release of their more experimental Dazzle Ships album, produced by Rhett Davies. The record mixed melancholy synth ballads and up-tempo synth pop with musique concrete and shortwave radio tape collages. Its relative commercial failure caused a crisis of confidence for Humphreys and McCluskey and brought about a deliberate move towards the mainstream. 1984's junk culture was a shift to a more pop-style sound, and the band used digital sampling keyboards such as the Fairlight CMI and the EMU emulator. The album was a success, reassuring the group about their new direction. The Locomotion single returned the group to the top 5 in the UK and was an indicator of the group's newfound sound, notably the adoption of a classic verse-chorus form, which is something the group had often previously avoided. Record Mirror readers named OMD the eighth best live act of 1984. In 1985, the success of the single So in Love in the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 also led to some success for the LP, which entered the American Top 40, establishing the group in the U.S. During this period, the band also recorded a version of So in Love in duet with the French pop singer Etienne Daho. Later in 1985, the band were asked to write a song for the John Hughes film Pretty in Pink. They offered Goddess of Love, although the ending of the film was reshot due to a negative response from test audiences. OMD then wrote If You Leave in less than 24 hours, and it became a top 5 hit in the US, Canada, and New Zealand in 1986. At the end of this year, the same six-piece lineup also released The Pacific Age, but the band began to see their critical and public popularity wane notably in the UK. The album's first single, Forever Live and Die, was a top 10 hit across Europe and entered the top 20 in both the UK and US. Journalist Hugo Lindgren argued that the success of If You Leave has concealed from US audiences the group's history of making innovative music. During 1988, OMD played a support slot for Depeche Mode's Music for the Masses tour at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California on 18 June 1988. They also released the top 20 U.S. hit Dreaming and a successful greatest hits album, The Best of OMD. Graham and Neil Weir left the band at the end of the 1988 U.S. tour. 1989–1996, McCluskey led OMD and disbandment. As OMD appeared poised to consolidate their U.S. success, the group continued to fracture. Humphreys departed in 1989 amid personal and creative dissension with McCluskey. Cooper and Holmes then left OMD to join Humphreys in founding a new band called the Listening Pool. McCluskey recalled, "We were all in agreement that something was wrong. How to fix it was where we disagreed." This left only McCluskey to carry on, essentially becoming a solo artist working under the OMD banner. McCluskey's first album from the new OMD was the dance-pop Sugar Tax album in May 1991, which charted at number 3 in the UK. McCluskey recruited in 1989 Liverpool musicians Raw Unlimited Lloyd Massett, Stuart Kershaw, Nathalie Lotz as collaborators for the making of Sugar Tax. Writing credits carefully distinguished between songs written by OMD, i.e. McCluskey, and songs written by OMD/Kershaw/Massett. This iteration of the group was initially successful with hits like Sailing on the Seven Seas and Pandora's Box, with lesser success on fellow chart entries Call My Name and Then You Turn Away. McCluskey's live band was then formed by Nigel Epinson keyboards, Phil Coxon keyboards, and Abe Jux drums from late 1990. Smash Hits readers voted OMD the sixth best British group of 1991. The album Liberator, which ventured further into dance territory, was released in 1993. It peaked at number 14 on the UK Albums Chart. Lead single Stand Above Me peaked at number 21 on the UK Singles Chart, with follow-up Dream of Me charting at number 24. Paul Humphreys, while no longer part of the group, the fifth track from Liberator, Dream of Me, was built around a sample from Love's Theme by Love Unlimited Orchestra, a track which was written and produced by Barry White. To release the Dream of Me track as an OMD single, however, McCluskey had to agree that the single release of the track would remove the actual Love's Theme sample, but still be officially titled Dream of Me based on Love's Theme, and furthermore would still give a writing credit to White. Also in 1993, McCluskey made contributions to the Esperanto album, a project by former Kraftwerk member Karl Bartos, then working under the moniker of Electric Music. McCluskey returned with a rotating cast of musicians for the more organic Universal 1996, which featured 2 songs co-written by Humphreys as well as a holdover from the Esperanto sessions, co-penned by Bartos. The record spawned OMD's first top 20 hit in 5 years, Walking on the Milky Way. Though both Liberator and Universal produced minor hits, McCluskey retired the OMD name in late 1996 due to waning public interest. A particular source of frustration was the modest commercial response to Walking on the Milky Way, over which McCluskey said he sweated blood, considering it about as good a song as I could write. BBC Radio 1 refused to playlist the song, which in turn led to High Street store Woolworths refusing to stock it. McCluskey said, "I just thought, screw this, I'm not going to bang my head against a brick wall." A second singles album was released in 1998, along with an EP of remixed material by such acts as Sash and Moby. Post-1996, McCluskey decided to focus on songwriting for such Liverpool-based acts as Atomic Kitten and the Genie Queen, and trying to develop new Merseyside artists from his Motor Museum recording studio. With McCluskey focusing his talents elsewhere, Humphreys decided to work with his new musical partner Claudia Brucken of the ZTT bands Propaganda and Act as Wantwo. He also undertook a U.S. live tour under the banner Paul Humphreys from OMD. 2006–2012, an unexpected request to perform from a German television show led the group to reunite. On 1 January 2006, Andy McCluskey announced plans to reform OMD with the McCluskey, Humphreys, Holmes, and Cooper lineup. The original plan was to tour the album Architecture and Morality and Other Premise 1983 material, then record a new album set for release in 2007. In May 2007, The Architecture and Morality Remastered CD was re-released together with a DVD featuring the Drury Lane concert from 1981 that had previously been available on VHS. Through May and June, the band toured with the classic lineup of McCluskey, Humphreys, Holmes, and Cooper. They began their set with a reordered but otherwise complete restaging of the Architecture and Morality album. The second half of each concert featured a selection of their best-known hits. In spring 2008, a live CD and DVD of the 2007 tour, Omni Live Architecture and Morality and More, recorded at the London Hammersmith Apollo, was released, as was a 25th anniversary re-release of Dazzle Ships, including 6 bonus tracks. At the same time, a brief October 2008 tour was announced, partly to tie in with the Dazzle Ships album's 25th anniversary. China Crisis supported OMD on this tour. In June 2009, an orchestral concert with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic was given in Liverpool. A recording of this concert was released on DVD in December. In November and December, the band returned to arena touring as support for Simple Minds. OMD had performed with Night of the Proms in December 2006 in Germany and renewed the experience again in Belgium and the Netherlands that year. They were the headline act at Britain's first vintage computer festival at the National Museum of Computing, Bletchley Park, in June 2010. On 9 September 2010, Trevor Horn announced that OMD would perform as a special guest at the first ever gig of the Buggles. Their 11th studio album, History of Modern, was released in September, reaching No. 28 in the UK Albums Chart. A European tour followed in autumn. In March 2011, OMD played their first North American tour as the original lineup since 1988. In September, the band appeared at the Electric Picnic 2011 festival in Stradbally, Coalish, Ireland. In November 2011, OMD announced they were getting back to the studio to start work on their latest album, English Electric. On 12 March 2012, the band played a concert at the Smart Araneta Coliseum in Quezon City, Philippines. In August, OMD performed to South African audiences in Cape Town and Johannesburg. 2013 present. Continued acknowledgement. On 29 January 2013, Golden Voice announced OMD for the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival in Indio, California on 14 and 21 April. On 11 February, OMD announced Metroland would be the first single from the forthcoming album English Electric. The single was released on 25 March and includes the B-side The Great White Silence. The album English Electric was released in the UK on 8 April and entered the UK album chart at number 12 and the German chart at number 10. Reviews for both the album and their concerts have generally been positive. For Record Store Day 2013, on 20 April, a 500-copy limited edition 10-inch picture disc EP The Future Will Be Silent from English Electric was made available, which includes a then-exclusive non-album track titled Time Burns. For Record Store Day 2015, on 18 April, a 1,000-copy limited edition 10-inch EP Julius Song Dub version from Junk Culture was made available, which includes an exclusive non-album track titled 10 to 1. OMD performed a one-off concert at the Royal Albert Hall, London on 9 May 2016 to a sellout crowd, playing both Architecture and Morality and Dazzle Ships in their entirety, along with other songs that were Preminus 1983. The only song post-Minus 1983 played was History of Modern Part 1. The concert was recorded and made available on double CD right after the show. A triple LP vinyl recording of the concert was also made available. The band collaborated with Gary Barlow, Taron Egerton, and Hugh Jackman on the OMD song Thrill Me, co-written by Barlow and McCluskey for the soundtrack of the film Eddie the Eagle. In October, work was begun on what was to be their 13th studio album, The Punishment of Luxury, which was released on 1 September 2017. OMD toured Europe and North America in support of the album, with Stuart Kershaw replacing Holmes as the band's drummer due to the latter's health issues. In 2018, OMD published a book entitled Pretending to See the Future, which is a first-person autobiography about the band. It mixed fan-submitted memories with commentary from McCluskey, Humphreys, Cooper, Holmes, and Kershaw. For people who pre-ordered the book on Pledge Music, they received a limited edition flexi disc containing a previously unheard demo of Messages from 1978. As part of the group's 40th anniversary celebrations, a UK and European tour was announced in March 2019. OMD won Group of the Year and Live Act of the Year in the 2019 Classic Pop Reader Awards. A retrospective deluxe box set entitled Souvenir was also announced in August 2019. The 40th anniversary collection includes the band's 40 singles, including new release Don't Go. It also contains 22 previously unreleased recordings from the group's archive, selected and mixed by Paul Humphreys. 2 audio live shows, one from 2011 and one from 2013, are also included, together with 2 DVD bringing together 2 more live concerts: Drury Lane in 1981 and Sheffield City Hall in 1985, plus Crush the Movie, and various BBC TV performances from Top of the Pops, The Old Grey Whistle Test, and Live. The box set was nominated for Best Historical Album at the 2021 Grammy Awards. According to McCluskey, a new studio album will be released, likely somewhere in 2022. Artistry and Image. James Hunter of Spin wrote that OMD set about reinventing punk with different applications of dance beats, keyboards, melodies, and sulks, rejecting the genre's sonic trappings but not its intellectual freedom. The band found commercial success with a style of synth-pop described as experimental, minimalist, and edgy. OMD often issued choruses, replacing them with synthesizer lines, and opted for unconventional lyrical subjects such as industrial processes, micronations, and telephone boxes. The BBC said that the group were always more intellectual than contemporaries like Duran Duran and Eurythmics. Despite the band's experimentation, they employed pop hooks in their music, attaining what AllMusic's Ned Raggett described as the enviable position of at once being creative innovators and radio-friendly pop giants. They were influenced by electronic artists such as Kraftwerk, Brian Eno, and New, as well as more mainstream acts like David Bowie and Roxy Music. OMD drew inspiration from former Factory Records label mates Joy Division, particularly during the making of Organization 1980. The group also recorded 2 Velvet Underground covers. OMD were indifferent to celebrity status and avoided the calculated fashion stylings of many of their 1980s peers. During live performances, McCluskey developed a spasmodic dancing style that has been dubbed the trainee-teacher dance. He explains that it stemmed from the perception that OMD were making boring, robotic, intellectual music that you couldn't dance to. Journalist Hugo Lindgren noted that the band were perceived as oddballs, freaks on the Liverpool scene. McCluskey has identified himself and Humphreys as synth-punks and complete geeks. Gareth Ware of DIY called OMD one of the guiding lights of British synth-pop. Critic Andrew Collins said the group represented a wave of uncool pop stars who would eventually become cool in the public eye. Mid-1980s style change. The experimental Dazzle Ships 1983 was a critical and commercial disappointment upon release. This prompted OMD to move towards a more accessible sound on the Black Music-influenced Junk Culture 1984. The band also donned more vibrant garments on the album's accompanying tour. The group continued to incorporate sonic experimentation, although their sound became increasingly polished on the Stephen Hague-produced records Crush 1985 and The Pacific Age 1986. Some journalists have rejected the group's post-Dazzle Ships reinvention, while others have expressed an appreciation for the new direction. Sean O'Neill of the AV Club said OMD would give up creatively, while the Quietus founder John Doran wrote, It's quite popular to see OMD as nosediving into the affluence after Dazzle Ships, but the truth is there is still much to recommend. Although junk culture is seen to represent a shift toward a more pop-oriented style, some critics feel that the group did not relinquish their experimental ethos until 1985, the year in which they released Crush. Elements of earlier experimentation have nevertheless been observed on Crush and follow up the Pacific Age. Musicians have commented on OMD mid-1980s output. Michael Telekinesis Learner wrote that junk culture was not something he could sink his teeth into, adding that he did not invest in the band again until after their reunion. Moby remarked, their earlier records were just phenomenal. A few years on they were making music for John Hughes movies, and they were good at it, and I'm glad that they had success with it, but it wasn't nearly as creatively inspiring. On the other hand, Tony Cannell of No Doubt said, OMD inspired us to try and do our own John Hughes prom scene movie moment kind of songs. Junk culture is great. Angus Andrew of Liars referred to the complexity and mastery in OMD later pop material, calling himself a fan of OMD albums from all of their phases. Spin journalist Jessica Bendinger wrote, in 1988, OMD music has been colored by continual exploration, which has run the gamut from Gregorian chant-inspired anthems of love to a union of orchestral Motown. Subsequent reinventions. The McCluskey-led OMD explored a dance-oriented approach on Sugar Tax 1991 and Liberator 1993. Critic Ian Peel wrote that the band defied expectations by updating their sound and becoming, if only briefly, relevant in the 90s. The group disbanded shortly after the release of Universal 1996, on which they strained for a more organic and acoustic sound. McCluskey recalled a negative media perception of the band by the mid-1990s, saying, at the height of indie rock and Britpop, we were totally out of fashion. Since OMD 2006 reformation, their material has been seen as more akin to their early output. Legacy and influence. OMD have been named as pioneers of electronic music, and one of the more important acts of the synth-pop genre. Night Shift identified OMD and fellow late 1970s debutants Gary Newman and the Human League as the holy trinity of synth-pop. All Music's Andy Kellman emphasized the band's inventive albums and status as one of the earliest, most commercially successful, and enduring synth-pop groups. Hugo Lindgren of the New York Times wrote that OMD cultivated a legacy as musical innovators, adding, the genre they helped invent file under synth-pop proved hugely popular. The band have been recognized as playing a prominent role in defining the sound of 1980s and early 1990s popular music. In particular, Electricity 1979 and If You Leave 1986 have been identified as two of the most influential records of their era. The group have drawn comparisons to preeminent Merseyside act the Beatles, with McCluskey and Humphreys being labeled the Lennon-McCartney of synth-pop. OMD often faced hostility from the music press. Record Mirror's Simon Ludgate told how they received a thorough tarring of the same brush as then-maligned artist Gary Newman, but were able to weather this almost certain kiss of death. Van Walsh of The Independent said that the band might not attract the kudos of Depeche Mode, Joy Division, and New Order, but they were certainly as significant. Despite their difficult relationship with critics, the group have earned a cult following. DJ Chris Evans remarked, there are fans, and then there are OMD fans. Their fans may be among the greatest in the world. The band also enjoys a large fan base within the LGBT community, which McCluskey says they cherish. Architecture and Morality 1981, regarded as OMD's seminal album, had sold more than 4 million copies by early 2007. Sugar Tax 1991, the record that marked a commercial renaissance for the group, had sold more than 3 million by the same time period. The experimental Dazzle Ships 1983, which met with a degree of critical and commercial hostility, has been retrospectively praised by critics and cited as one of the band's most influential works. OMD overall record sales stand in excess of 40 million, with sales of more than 15 million albums and 25 million singles. Impact on other artists. OMD influenced several 1980s contemporaries, including Men Without Hats and Depeche Mode. Vince Clarke, who established the latter group's electronic direction and later founded Yazoo and Erasure, cites OMD as his inspiration to become an electronic musician. OMD were an important act for Pet Shop Boys, whose singer Neil Tennant identified the band as pioneers of electronic music. The group were revered by Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Howard Jones, Alphaville, Book of Love, and Ricky Wilde, songwriter/producer for Kim Wilde, and were also influential on New Order and Tears for Fears' exploration of electronic instruments. Electricity was an influence on the fledgling Duran Duran. The band have garnered praise from other synth-pop peers, including the Human League's Philip Oakey, Thompson Twins' Tom Bailey, Trevor Horn, and Gary Newman, who credited OMD for some of the best pop songs ever written. Within the rock genre, the group influenced then progressive band Spoons and were championed by ZZ Top, who drew inspiration from OMD use of synthesizers and on-stage dancing. OMD have been influential on later artists such as No Doubt, Moby, Gary Barlow, MGMT, Paul Van Dyk, The Shins, The Divine Comedy, Liars, Owen Pallett, Red Hot Chili Peppers, John Frusciante, The Killers, Dave Kuning, AFI, Davey Havok, Baronate, Ladies, Kevin Hearn, Belle and Sebastian, Stevie Jackson. The band's influence also extends to country act Sugarland, physicist Brian Cox, and Steve Lamacq, who became a DJ after hearing Electricity. 1983's challenging Dazzle Ships was a key inspiration for the likes of Saint Etienne, Death Cab for Cutie, and Future Islands, while producer Mark Ronson was completely floored by the album. Elsewhere, OMD have received endorsements from musicians such as Sash, the Deftones, Chino Morno, The Charlatans, Tim Burgess, Sharon Van Etten, Hot Chips, Al Doyle, and LCD Sound System's James Murphy, for whom the group were childhood favorites. Sash recognized OMD as widely influential and one of the leading bands in the 80s and 90s regarding electronic music/production. The group's songs have been covered or sampled by acts including Gary Barlow, Howard Jones, MGMT, Owen Pallett, Boy George, Kid Cudi, Good Charlotte, Left Field, Scooter, Knopf's, Not a Surf, Angel Olsen, and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. OMD are also the subject of two 2001 tribute albums, which feature interpretations by the likes of White Town, The Faint, Mahogany, and Acid House Kings. David Guetta, who contributed a remix to 2003's The OMD Singles, described the opportunity to rework the band's material as a thrill for any electronic musician. The official biography OMD, Pretending to See the Future 2018, features tributes from OMD collaborators Vince Clarke, Moby, and Kraftwerk's Carl Bartos, along with peers like New Order's Stephen Morris, Otwo's Adam Clayton, and The Teardrop Explodes' David Balfe. Band members. Current members: Andy McCluskey, bass guitar, keyboards, vocals 1978-96, 2006 present. Paul Humphreys, keyboards, vocals 1978-89, 2006 present. Martin Cooper, keyboards, saxophone 1980-89, 2006 present. Stuart Kershaw, drums 1993, 2015 present. Piano 2010. Former members: Malcolm Holmes, drums and percussion 1980-89, 2006-2015. Dave Hughes, keyboards 1979-80. Michael Douglas, keyboards 1980-81. Graham Weir, guitar, brass, keyboards, writer 1984-89. Neil Weir, brass, keyboards, bass guitar 1984-89. Phil Coxon, keyboards 1991-93. Nigel Ipinson, keyboards 1991-93. Abe Jux, drums 1991-92. Timeline. Discography. Studio albums: Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark 1980, Organization 1980. Architecture and Morality 1981. Dazzle Ships 1983. Junk Culture 1984. Crush 1985. The Pacific Age 1986. Sugar Tax 1991. Liberator 1993. Universal 1996. History of Modern 2010. English Electric 2013. The Punishment of Luxury 2017.